Hello artists, we're going to work on how to shade 3D forms that start out with a basic shape. So I've got 5 basic shapes that are turning into forms by extruding them into 3-dimensional space. First, if I take a circle and I shade it, I'm going to end up with a sphere, and I've outlined where a cast shadow would fall for each of these. If I take a rectangle and I extrude it into 3-dimensional space and I shade it, you're going to see a rectangular prism, or the illusion of a rectangular prism, on a 2-dimensional surface, which is my flat paper. We're going to take what started out as a triangle, okay, and we add a circle to the base. So triangle and a circle together are going to give us the form of a cone, and again, I've outlined the cast shadow as well. Then if we take a rectangle and we add circles, I wrote circle, but it's rectangle plus circles, you're going to get the form of a cylinder. So they have circular bases. And those circles in the case of the cone and the cylinder are going to appear as ellipses, which is what happens when you take a circle and you rotate it and it flattens out. Okay, and then last but not least, if you take a triangle and you extrude it into 3-dimensional space, you can get a triangular pyramid. Okay, now because I'm using graphite, and graphite is a soft metal that smudges easily, it can be really helpful to block your hand so you don't smudge your other work by just using a spare piece of paper. So I'm going to zoom in to my circle, and we need to choose a direction of light. You see your source of light, and right now for me I actually have 2 light sources. I'm using a document camera to film this, and my document camera has its own light, and you can see if I put my hand in front of it, that blocks it. Right above that I have a lamp that's on a swing arm, and it's being pulled over here, so you can see I'm blocking that light. So they're both coming basically from above and slightly to the left of my object. So if I think of my object here as being a sphere, I'm hearing loud traffic outside, I apologize, then I'm going to have my light source coming in this direction, okay, and I can just represent that to myself as my light source, and that's the direction of my light source. It's an arrow. Okay. So what I know is that if my light source is coming from above and to the left, I'm going to have an area on here that is really, really bright, and I'm just kind of making an ellipse or a flattened circle on the top there to remind myself that that's going to be super bright, okay, and it's not going to have much shadow. Now the darkest place is going to be opposite that, so if I follow that down, it's going to be darkest down here. And when you're shading a sphere, what ends up getting shaded, what we call the core shadow, which is the darkest part of the shadow on the object itself, is going to be kind of a crescent moon shape. So I can put my shading in by using the side of the tip of my pencil. Now I'm not going to go all the way to the bottom of my circle here, because as the light is coming down, some of it's going to curve around. Usually my light source isn't completely blocked by this object here. And say it's on a table, I can represent that, the line of the edge of that table here. And if it's on a table and it's a light surface of a table, then some of the light is going to hit the table and bounce back underneath. So we get an area of reflected light that's not going to be white, but it's going to be not as dark as the core shadow. So in the middle of the core shadow is going to be the darkest part. So I'm just going to lay some graphite down here. Actually, I'm going to erase this. I'm just going to remind myself that I want to protect an area where I don't add any graphite. Okay, and I have gone ahead and sketched out the basic outline shape, but my sketched shape, the shape is 2-dimensional, is a little bit rough, and so I can, once I am more confident with my edge here, I can erase the extra graphite that's smudgy. So it does help to kind of rotate your hand around or rotate your paper around. And you can, with practice, you can get pretty good at shading with just a pencil. But for me, I find it very helpful to go in and smudge this. I do not have a blending stump here today. A blending stump is a rolled up bit of paper. These are also called tortillions. But if you have one, they're really helpful for shading. I can use the surface of my fingertip, which is pretty big and bulky, and it's a little bit hard to control where I'm putting the graphite, but you can see I'm kind of continuing up with that crescent shape, and I'm smudging the outline of my circle a little bit, so I can come in lightly with the graphite, still thinking about a circular or an elliptical shape, and lighter as I'm getting closer towards that top area that I kind of tried to protect earlier. So you have a mid-tone, which is the in between the light and the dark. And if you start to lose the edge of your shape there, just drop back in. My upper line here is a little too dark. So I don't need a thick dark outline. I just need to find where that edge is, and I can come back, kind of sketch that back in if I smudge it too much. But I can work back and forth with layering up that graphite. And then down here in the bottom, I had sketched out the area of the cast shadow, which is going to be an ellipse. And I've smudged that out and I've kind of lost it. So my reflected light on the bottom, depending on what the material is that my sphere is made out of, if it's a metallic marble or orb, if it's made out of a shiny metal, then it's going to be extra reflective. But if it's just like a ping pong ball or a rubber ball or a softer material, it's not going to be as shiny and you're not going to have as much of a reflection. The lighter the object, the more reflection you're going to get. And the more you use the tip of your pencil, the more you're going to get harsh lines that are going to be harder to smudge. So I want to think about the idea of a core shadow is that the darkest part of the shadow kind of follows that curve of this figure, and you can kind of trace that out. And you, as you're smudging this or layering it, you want to get heavier in the area of the core shadow. Now the cast shadow, so I can keep smudging that a bit. The cast shadow is where the light is blocked, and it's going to be the darkest right underneath your object. So you're really going to want to go in right where your object is opposite that light source. But if it's touching a tabletop, for example, or a surface, it's going to be extra, extra dark right where it comes in contact with that surface. And then it's going to fade out. So I sharpened my pencil just before I started this sketch, which is kind of a bummer because I end up getting these harsh lines. But the more I wear it down, the more I can use a wider surface area and get a thicker area as I'm laying down graphite. So as you get to the edge of your shadow, notice if I put my hand here, you can see the edge of the shadow here is fuzzy. Shadows do not have harsh outlines, so please don't go in with your hard tip of your pencil and draw a hard outline. You just want to shade right up to the edge. And you can use your fingertip or a blending stump to go in there and smudge that out. So you can see how we want a nice clear edge of our bottom object, and we can do that by just getting a nice dark connection of the cast shadow, which is the light that is blocked by your object as it hits the next surface. Okay, and I'm going to just kind of gradually fade this out as I get to the edge of my shadow space. And you can go in and smudge that with your fingertip or a blending stump. And then check and see if you have uneven areas. You can use your fingertip, and if you do, you're going to want to go back in and erase. So I'm just going to do this as an example. I might end up being too fuzzy around the edge. So notice that doesn't really make a lot of sense there. So if you go in with your eraser, it can get a really harsh line as well. So you kind of have to do what's called pushing and pulling the graphite. Go back and forth between smudging, erasing, and going over your drawn area. So that's the basics. This looks a little uneven here of shading for a sphere. And I kind of want to blend this out a little bit. So I'm just going to keep looking at my work and see if it needs a little extra. It should get a little darker. I don't need that much reflection. And when it's away from the surface that's reflecting, I don't really need it to be that big of a reflected area. So core shadow is just where it's the darkest, and then you fade into, again, what's called the midtone. So highlight, midtone, core shadow, reflected light, cast shadow. All right, so there's my basic sphere. So we've gone from feeling two-dimensional with a circle to feeling three-dimensional with a sphere. All right, the rectangle, I drew out the basic form for you. When we see in perspective, that means from my point of view, the front of the rectangle is going to be closer to me, this rectangular prism. The back is a little bit farther away. So the rectangle that would form the back of this is going to be a little shorter. So I want to make sure that this line here is a little longer than this line, but they should be parallel. So if that's horizontal, that should be horizontal. Now, by definition, a rectangle has opposite sides parallel and equal. So if this bottom side is flat on the tabletop, this one should be parallel to that. These ones are vertical, they should be parallel. Okay, a big mistake that I see artists making, beginning artists making, when trying to draw a rectangular prism is that they will have the back lines go up at a diagonal. And so if this is horizontal, my rectangle in the back is also horizontal. If this is vertical, my line of my rectangle in the back is also vertical. So notice if you're making your lines go a little bit crooked. Okay, so again, if my light source is coming from above and to the left, the lightest area here is going to be the top. So once you find the lines of your outline, if you get a little bit dark, notice that I go back in and erase, and I'm picking up the extra graphite. So I don't need to keep a thick line. That was just my sketch. This side back here is going to have the least light hitting it. So as I go in and shade, it helps to draw with my graphite using the side of the tip of my pencil. Try to make it as even as you can. You can always go darker. It's hard to lighten up a space without making it really uneven. I would have to use my eraser to do that. So I'm just trying to go in as evenly as I can. Try not to lose the line of that top edge. But I don't need a harsh outline. I don't need a strong outline to define the edges here. I can just shade into those lines that I have sketched out already. Okay, this is going to be the lightest area here on the top. Now, unless I'm drawing a white box, it's not going to be white on the top, even though that's the direction of my light source. So I can have a lighter tone. My mid-tone is going to go on this side here. It's between the top, which is the highlighter, the lightest area, and the back, which has the least light. So as I'm going back and forth, it's really easy to go out the edge. So I'm just going to go approach the edge, and I can come back in more slowly if I'm very patient. But it's really hard not to go over into the next space. So a lot of people will just rotate their paper. Really try to use the side of your pencil instead of the tip. You're going to get more graphite transferred more evenly. I am getting lines because that's the way the graphite is coming off of my pencil. But I can go in and blend those with my fingertip in a moment. Or I can just go back and forth and use just the pencil itself. I personally like the blended look that I get by using a fingertip. You could use a tissue, a Q-tip, a rolled up piece of paper that's rolled to a fine point, or you can go to an art store and purchase a blending stump. Okay, so if my shading looks too similar, if I'm having a hard time finding the edge there, just go back in. You don't have to draw a dark edge, but it can tell you to make a clear distinction or a clear difference between your shaded areas. So the darker areas should be clearly darker and evenly darker. So I can kind of clean up that edge. Now remember, with my cast shadow, it's going to be super dark where my object touches the surface. So I'm just blending this with my fingertip, and I like how that smooths that out. Same with back here. And as I do that, I'm collecting graphite on my fingertip, so I can add just a lighter amount of graphite to that top. And if I smudge out my line too much, I can just carefully kind of draw that back in. So like I said, I can always go darker, but it's tough to lighten up an area that you've got dark. Even if your graphite erases pretty well, it's hard to put it back in evenly. So I encourage you to start out lighter and then get gradually darker. Okay. Now I can go in, like I said, and clean up my smudged areas with my eraser. This is a white plastic eraser. These are softer and are going to be more gentle with your paper than a pink rubber eraser. They're usually a little bit more expensive, but it's not a lot of money to get a white plastic eraser, and some pencils just come with them. Okay, so again, where I have my cast shadow, where it comes right into contact with my object, it's going to be the darkest, and then it's going to kind of fade out. So I'm doing that thing where I'm going back and forth, and I'm trying to put in even pressure. And then I'm just going to gradually fade it out as I get out towards the edge of my figure. And I've just kind of thought about how would my light be blocked if the light's coming from above. So I'm kind of following this down here, and then this edge is coming out here. So this is a pretty short shadow, so that means my light is almost directly above. No, I'm in a little bit of a hurry. I have a meeting in a few minutes. Okay. So again, I can use my fingertip. I can use a blending stump. Try not to get too sharp of an edge on a shadow. So I can just kind of get a little bit blurry even just with the pencil on that edge. Just kind of soften that up. Okay, and it's uneven in there. All right, so basic rectangular prism, sphere. I've gone from a rectangle to a rectangular prism. A cone is a combination of a triangle and a circle, and again an ellipse. If I take a circle and I rotate it away from me, it flattens out. So I've drawn the whole ellipse, even though if this is not transparent, I'm not going to see either of these spaces. So I'm going to go ahead and erase the back of the ellipse. But the mistake that I see people making is they just do a flat line, which makes this a triangle. Part of a cone is that it has a circle as the base that rotates and becomes an ellipse. All right, who took my eraser? Seriously, my eraser just went. Here it is. All right. Okay, and as the light is coming from above, then this back area here is going to be lighter. But an interesting thing happens with a cone as you're shading, and I find it easier to rotate the paper. You can kind of lightly go in my core shadow. It's actually going to be a little bit more back in this direction. So I can follow this is a little awkward here. So you're going to go from the tip down, and it's going to spread out because it's a cone, which is based on a triangle plus a circle. So the core shadow is darkest, and then it fades out. So it's darkest in the center, and it fades out. So really go down, make sure that that is a curve, and it's curved to the edge. It's not pointed on the edge. So it curves down, and it can look like a slice of pie if you're looking at it flat on. But it's darkest, right? The core, meaning the center, so the core shadow, the darkest part. You want to be consistent all the way down to the bottom edge of that cone. Okay, and then you're going to fade. So keep going up to that top and fade out. And you can blend with your fingertip. Now you often have cones that are a little bit shiny. An ice cream cone is not going to be shiny. But I have a little party hat here that's shiny, and you can see the reflective areas and these shapes that come down that are darker and lighter on that cone. So sometimes it's a little bit striped, just depending on how the light bounces off here. And again, remember that you're going to get a really dark space as your cast shadow connects with the base. So you want a really clear edge at that point. And it goes up into a triangle. The sides are straight, but it comes in off of an ellipse. So that part's going to curve, and then it's going to straighten out. Okay, and I've got kind of dark outlines there, which I've cautioned you against. So you're fading into that slightly lighter edge of your shadow, even pressure. If you want to do a really careful job, you're not going to be in this big of a hurry. Like I said, I have a meeting soon, but I want to do quality work for you. So it's going to be lighter in the front, so try to make that even. I don't want to smudge this. Okay, but you can see how this starts to go from feeling two-dimensional to three-dimensional as I'm adding my shading. So core shadow to mid-tone to lighter, and it's going to get the lightest out towards the edge, so I can go heavier pressure, more graphite as I'm heading into the core, the darkest part of that shadow, the shading. Okay, and then really get that, define that edge where your cast shadow hits, and bring your shading all the way down to the base. Okay, don't lose the outside of your cone. Like I said, you don't need a hard outline that's super defined, so try to fade into it with your shading. And if you want to bring in some highlights on here where the light, especially if you want to show a shiny surface like I showed you with the little party hat, you can go in with your eraser and pull that out. So I'm just trying first to get my shading even with my graphite. Smudge it with my fingertip. You notice places where it's uneven. And you can go in with your eraser. Now I have a smaller one on the end of my mechanical pencil. So you can go in and pick out some areas to give a feeling of shine. If you have a shiny surface, then you might have a shiny reflection over here somewhere. That feels a little odd. It feels a little striped to me. So I'm just going to blend that and make sure that my graphite goes all the way up to the top. And if my line got smudged, clean it up with an eraser. All right, so that's the basic idea with a cone. See how three-dimensional those look? Nice. Okay, how are we doing here? I think I have 2 minutes, so I'm gonna just kind of fast forward here. So with a cylinder, same idea. So I've got the circles there. I'm gonna think that my core shadow, similar to what I had up here in the cone, it's gonna be darkest over here. So don't lose the edge of your ellipse. Now the top, because that's closer to your eye level, is gonna appear flatter. When it comes down to the bottom, it should be just a little bit rounder. So notice this is a little bit of a taller ellipse than this one. So it comes down curved from the sides, and you're going to shade in. And unless it's transparent, I'm not actually going to see the back of that, but I wanted you to recognize that there's a rectangle in here with circular bases. So core shadow means the core, the darkest part of your shadow, of your shading. And then fade to mid-tone. You can blend that with your fingertip. And then a little bit of a shading on here, but it's going to be lighter. I can even pick up some graphite there and let it fade out. Mid-tone. Try to make it even. Can you redefine your edges? I don't like to be rushed, but I don't want to be late to my meeting. Okay, and again, here's that cast shadow. In this case, it's coming down off the top. The top is rounded, so I rounded off the top of my cast shadow. Darkest at the base, fade it out. The more you wear down the tip of your pencil, the more surface area you have to go in and shade. Okay. That one's a little bit rushed, but you get the idea. And then triangular prism. This backside's going to be the darkest because the most light is blocked here. You're going to get a mid-tone on the side. Do take the time to go in. This one's pretty simple. It's really two triangles next to each other. Okay, do try to take the time to go in and even that out. Okay, here's my base. And it might be a little lighter at the top because that's closer to your light source. So if you want to kind of fade that, you can. Not a ton lighter, but a little bit. And then again, really define that edge for your cast shadow because you're blocking pretty much all the light as that's touching your surface. And then fade it out. That's basically it. Again, no outline, no visible outline on your shadow. And this one was the most rushed, so it is the least even. So let me clean that up a little bit. I am a perfectionist, so it's painful for me to rush, but it can be a good practice to try to do quick work that's high quality. Okay, there you go.